Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 10 of my journey to Unguro card review. This time around, I just have 3 cards, but one of them is a new class legendary, the Warrior one specifically, so I'm pretty excited to take a look at these. So let's go ahead and jump right into this, starting off with the big boy himself. This is King Mosh, new 9-mana legendary minion for Warriors. This is a beast, and it's a 9/7 body with a pretty interesting battle cry: destroy all damaged minions. So yet another warrior card that synergizes with whirlwind effects doing damage to your opponent's side of the board. But this one, of course, is not just a spell. This is a battle cry, and essentially it's a board-wide execute. Execute has been a very prominent spell in the past for Warrior, particularly in more control-style archetypes, which historically have been the most common form of Warrior. Lately, we've seen a lot more Pirate Warrior and even Dragon Warriors that are more aggressive / mid-range. But this harkens back to the days of Control Warrior. You can't run a 9-mana cost card like this in Pirates, obviously, and you wouldn't want to anyway, so this is very clearly designed for that style of play. You could maybe fit this into a mid-range or tempo Warrior as sort of a pseudo replacement for Deathwing, a card those decks have run if they've just run out of gas and they have to have a last resort kind of card. King Mosh could fill that hole, but unfortunately, as similar as this is to Deathwing in many ways with a battle cry that could theoretically destroy all minions, this doesn't have quite as much punch as Deathwing in the fact that this battle cry is conditional. You have to have that whirlwind effect on the opponent's board if you want to kill it. Alternatively, you could just trade into stuff, hit it with a weapon, all the other ways to activate execute other than just whirlwind effects, but that makes this card a lot harder to pull off. Deathwing is basically guaranteed. If you draw it, you can do it. Now, there's obviously a downside with Deathwing. You throw away all the cards in your hand. This card doesn't have that downside, but in that regard, I think this is in many ways a win more kind of card. Like, you have to already be in a halfway decent spot to make King Mosh work. So you have to have a Whirlwind in hand, and there's only one current spell that fits that, which is actually Whirlwind itself, not just any Whirlwind effect. If you had a weapon loaded up like Death Spite, you could theoretically Death Spite and then play King's Mosh and load up your Whirlwind effect ahead of time, but that's not in standard format anymore, so that would be reserved for Wilds unless Warrior gets something else like that. Whirlwind looks like the only one-turn combination that could activate this card successfully. You could have small minions on board, trade into your opponent's stuff, and kill it. But ultimately, I think it's going to take 2 cards, Whirlwind and King Mosh, to make this really work. The downside, of course, too, is that you do kill your own minions on your own side of the board, because this is not just enemy minions, this is all minions, which sucks. So I think this was designed as a counter to Jade-style decks. We've seen, like, Paladin's Legendary looks like a bit of a counter to Jade-style decks, and now Warriors feels like Blizzard is, again, tossing control classes that are historically control classes some way to answer Jade Druid, because Jade Druid currently, if you want to go control v control, Jade Druid is pretty much an inevitable win. So I think the idea here with King Mosh is to help Warriors pull that off. And it theoretically would work, but again, unfortunately, I think this card's just a little bit too slow at 9 mana, a little bit too hard to pull off the condition. The fact that it's a beast could be relevant in like a curator style deck with a mix of maybe Murlocs and dragons and beasts. But Warrior is losing its only other good beasts, the Fierce Monkey, the 3-mana 3/4 taunt from League of Explorers. So this could fill that gap a little bit in a curator control Warrior. But again, I just don't know that this card is easy enough to meet the condition for the battle cry. If it was just destroy all minions like Deathwing, that'd be much, much easier. But the fact that they have to be damaged, I just don't know how consistently that's going to happen. It's by no means a bad card. It has a strong effect. It's a very powerful effect, clearing a board of stuff. So if you do save that Whirlwind in hand, it's a good way to make a Whirlwind useful in the late game, which currently Whirlwinds are often good in the early game, but not fantastic in the late game. So that can be an advantage in control decks where you need those early cards to answer aggression, but then they become useless later on. King Mosh could enable that in some ways, but again, Whirlwind is not a card anybody wants to run. You'd rather run Revenge, although that is also a card that's rotating out, so perhaps this becomes some sort of pseudo-replacement. And since Warrior does have so many other Enrage synergy cards where they like to deal damage to their own stuff, King Mosh goes counter to that and risks your board if you've got your own damaged stuff. So ultimately, I like this card. I want it to be good. It looks fun. It's a giant dinosaur. It's cool, but I think this is going to be one of those really high-cost legendaries that it's just hard to make it work in a real setting in an actual competitive environment. So I don't think King Mosh is going to be all that great, and I don't think he's going to see much play, which is very, very sad. So let's move on to the next card. I should make a quick note on this one. The name on this has been translated from the initial reveal, and nobody's really sure yet what the exact name of this card will be in English. Small Raptor is the current direct translation, but I have a feeling it'll be something like Baby Raptor or Young Raptor or something of the sort. So keep in mind this is a real card. This was released officially, but overseas, and therefore we don't know the English yet. But anyway, the Small Raptor, as we'll call it, is a 1-mana hunter minion. Of course, it's a beast. It's a 2/1, and it has a death rattle. Shuffle a 4/3 Raptor into your deck, and that doesn't sound that exciting, but you can see on the right side of the screen there, the 4/3 Raptor is actually only 1 mana, which is pretty good, and that card's probably going to be something like Raptor Patriarch, as we've seen from the translation, so we don't know the name of that card officially either, but a 1-mana 4/3 is outstanding. Insane value. The problem, of course, is that Hunter historically hasn't had a ton of card draw, so shuffling stuff into your deck hasn't been a great strategy because it's really going to be hard to find it. There's things like trackings that could pull it out, but you don't want to use tracking on a 1-mana minion, most likely, so that's not going to help. But, of course, with the new Hunter legendary quest, I believe it's called the Marsh Queen, as soon as you summon, I believe it's 7 1-mana minions, you get 15 Raptors shuffled into your deck, which are 1-mana minions. They're 3/2 Raptors, and every time you play them, you draw a card. So this is very clearly a card that is designed to support a quest hunter style of deck in which you need a lot of 1-drops and you need a lot of card cycle. And in fact, you get a lot of card cycle as a reward for that. So, you know, Small Raptor, if you top deck the 4/3 Raptor immediately after, you're going to be flying through your quest. Even if not, it's a 4/3, so it's if you play one of the quest Raptors that draws you a card, you won't be too sad about drawing a 4/3 because that's a reasonably sizable body. It's a beast that activates all your beast stuff. So I like this card. I mean, 1-mana 2/1s are usually nice in more aggressively oriented decks that are trying to push some damage or trade up into 2-drops. So the Small Raptor itself is okay, and then the Raptor that gets added to your deck is obviously a very solid value play, an efficient play anyway, at least at 1-mana 4/3. It synergizes with the quest really nicely. That said, outside of the quest environment, I don't really know that Small Raptor's good enough to make the cut, because often top decking a 1-drop outside of that quest style of deck could be a pretty flat draw. When you need the Savannah High main or something bigger, a 1-mana 4/3 just isn't going to do the trick. Now, there also is worth noting the new Tolvir Warden, I think is the name of the card. I have trouble remembering all these cards. The new Hunter minion that is a 5-mana 3/5, draw 2 1-drops from your deck. That's another card that helps you cycle through to both of these minions. And you'd be pretty happy if you played the Small Raptor on 1, you eventually got to your Tolvir and it drew you that 1-mana 4/3. That'd be really, really fantastic. Would increase the average quality of that card draw quite a bit. That's another card that synergizes with the Hunter quest. So you can see Blizzard is designing pretty narrowly to support these new quests that they've implemented. I hope that doesn't mean that all the decks just build themselves and there's not a lot of room for variety, but clearly Small Raptor is the kind of card that would fit really, really nicely in there. So I think it's going to see play in that quest environment. Now, that said, I don't know the quest is good enough to actually be a competitively viable deck on the ladder. So Small Raptor only works there in my mind, and if that doesn't work, the quest thing just doesn't take off for hunters, then I don't think Small Raptor will be played. But otherwise, a fine card that could certainly see some time on the board if quests are good. So let's move on to the third and final card in this review. This is another Hunter minion. And actually, surprisingly, it's yet another one that synergizes with the Hunter quest in many ways. This is the Crackling Razormaw. It's a 2-mana 3/2 beast, as you might expect, and it has a battle cry, Adapt a Friendly Beast. Now, obviously, this is a 2-mana card, so it doesn't directly support the Hunter quest, but you can see the value here that if you're able to develop a 1-mana beast consistently, as you would often do in the Hunter quest deck, then Crackling Razormaw is really going to make that a powerful play. play something okay on turn 1. A small Raptor, for instance, it's just a pretty boring 2/1, doesn't do anything exciting. But when you follow that up and are able to adapt it almost immediately and start attacking with an adapted minion, suddenly this can be a 3/2. This could be a 5/1. This could be a 2/4. Like, there's all kinds of great adapt options that can make small Raptor a much more threatening presence and a very, very strong turn 1 play. And we know historically in Hearthstone that a good turn 1 that snowballs out of control is a very, very scary thing that makes decks quite powerful. So Crackling Razormaw seems like it could be the kind of card that enables that quite nicely. You could whiff on the adapts. You could just give it taunt or something that's not really all that actively useful on the board, but often it's going to be a pretty strong little 1/2 play. Now, of course, you're not guaranteed to draw into Crackling Razormaw on 2, but this is the kind of card that, even though it's a low-cost minion, I think will still offer surprisingly high value if you top deck it in the late game. As long as you're able to play a beast alongside Crackling Razormaw, this adapt effect can be pretty strong. Giving, a Savannah Highmane a Divine Shield or something could be great. Giving a Savannah Highmane the fact that it can't be targeted by spells or hero powers is insane. You could deny that polymorph and ensure that Savannah Highmane is going to live for a little while, pounding your opponent's face. So this is the kind of card I think actually would work outside of the Legendary Quest deck as well. I think this is a good enough little beast that it could find a home in virtually any Hunter deck that cares about minions and cares about adaptations and cares about beasts, which probably will be most of them. So this is a new good Hunter 2-drop, could replace things like King's Elec, for instance, that we've seen, or Huge Toad is also rotating out. So this is a new one to add in there at that slot for maybe an aggressive or mid-range Hunter. So I like Crackling Razormaw quite a bit. Nothing that fancy, but a nice active battle cry. Solid body for its cost. It's a beast itself. So there's a lot about this card that seems like it'll work for Hunter. So I think this one's pretty solid, and I think it will certainly see some play as long as Hunter is competitively viable. So that's actually it for this review, part 10 of my Journey to Unguro review. King Mosh, a cool card, but I don't think it's going to see play. Small Raptor will be a decent card and see some play in a Quest Hunter. I think Crackling Razormaw is actually a good card that'll see play across a variety of Hunter decks. So, that said, thank you so much for watching. If you have any thoughts, comments, questions about these cards, you guys know I love reading everything you have to say, so share it in the comments below. But until then, thanks again for watching, and until next time, game on.